You're not crazy. They really did pull away but never let go. They didn't stay, but they didn't leave either. They stopped showing up emotionally, but they never really disappeared. They grew colder, quieter, harder to reach, but then posted something, just vague enough for you to wonder if it was about you. They ignored your message for days, then liked your photo from weeks ago at 2 a.m. They said they weren't ready for a relationship, but kept orbiting, watching your stories, sending occasional, just checking in texts, leaving traces, tethering you. This is the part that no one talks about. That when someone with avoidant attachment fears closeness, they don't always run. They hover. You're not crazy for noticing the inconsistency. You're not imagining it. They are pulling away while not letting go. And this is not a contradiction. This is a pattern, a strategy, a nervous system survival loop that doesn't know how to love without losing control and doesn't know how to let go without losing the illusion of safety. The avoidant doesn't always disappear. Sometimes, the most controlling thing they do is stay just enough to keep your hope alive. What you're experiencing isn't just mixed signals. It's emotional distance weaponized as a form of invisible control. Not conscious, not malicious, but absolutely real. Because if you've ever asked yourself, if they don't want me, why are they still lingering? If they're over me, why are they still watching everything I do? If they needed space, why do they get triggered when I give it to them? Then this video is for you. Avoidant attachment doesn't always look like someone walking away and never coming back. Sometimes it looks like distance used as a hook, a way to maintain just enough connection to soothe their fear of abandonment, while avoiding just enough intimacy to protect themselves from vulnerability. And the result? You end up trapped in a purgatory of almosts. Never quite in, never quite out. Always chasing clarity. Always feeling like you're the crazy one for noticing the push-pull. Let's go deeper. Let's name the pattern. Because once you see it, you'll never be able to unsee it again. They pull away and that hurts. But then they check in just to see how you're doing. They act indifferent, but react when you set boundaries. They say they want space, but watch every digital move you make. They let you go, but never really let you be free. This is what it looks like when someone fears engulfment and abandonment at the same time. The core wound of the avoidant isn't just, I don't want closeness. It's closeness is dangerous, but being forgotten is worse. So what do? They stay close from far away. They use distance to control the relationship, not because they're evil, but because control is how they've learned to feel safe. This is the nervous system of someone who learned. To depend is to be disappointed. To need is to be shamed. To get close is to get hurt. But the need for connection doesn't vanish just because you've buried it. It goes underground. It becomes obsession masquerading as detachment. It becomes, I don't care, on the surface with, I need to know you still care, burning underneath. They don't want to be seen, but they still want to be desired. They don't want responsibility, but they want to know you're still emotionally available. They're not showing up, but God forbid you stop trying. This is how emotional distance becomes control. Because if they can keep you emotionally invested, without ever having to be vulnerable themselves, they win. They get the safety of knowing you're still there, without the risk of actually showing up fully. They get the illusion of closeness, without ever risking rejection. Let's call it what it is. Emotional hoarding. They don't want to share the relationship. They want to own it silently. Like keeping you in a box in the attic, not gone, not growing. Just there in case they ever need to feel something again. But here's the catch. You feel it. Every cell in your body knows it. You sense that even though they're not actively loving you, they haven't let go either. And you start to think you're the problem for wanting clarity. You start to feel needy for asking for more than breadcrumbs. You start to shame yourself for being the one who still feels. But what if I told you they feel too? They just don't know how to feel safely. So they don't show it directly. They show it through hovering, watching, withdrawing, but not detaching, keeping you in orbit so they don't have to face the finality of goodbye. Avoidant attachment isn't the absence of emotion. It's the inability to regulate it, to stay present with it, to risk expression without drowning in shame or fear. This is why avoidantly attached people can seem cold and obsessed at the same time. Detached, but jealous. Disinterested, but territorial. Gone, but never really gone. The part of them that pulls away is terrified of closeness. But the part of them that lingers? That's the part terrified of being erased. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, people don't disappear because they miss you. They stay in your orbit because they miss what you gave them. Your safety, your love, your attention, your forgiveness, your emotional labor, your presence. And they want it close enough to touch, without close enough to cost them anything. They're not afraid to lose you. They're afraid to lose the version of themselves that felt held when you were around, without having to do the hard work of being emotionally accountable. This is why many avoidants don't ask for connection. They provoke it, subtly, quietly, indirectly. A reaction, a story view, a delayed reply, a sudden reappearance. They don't say, "I miss you." They say, "Hey, you popped into my head." They don't say, "I'm sorry I hurt you." They say, "I hope you're doing okay." It's not that the words aren't emotional. It's that they're safe, emotionally sanitized, filtered through 10 layers of detachment, so they can reach out without ever being fully in. This is how they stay in control, because vulnerability is loss of control. And to the avoidant, loss of control feels like annihilation. So they give you just enough to keep you wondering, never enough to give you certainty. They let you believe there's hope, without ever giving you peace. And you end up in a war with yourself. One part of you knows they're emotionally unavailable. Another part of you clings to the signs that say maybe they still care. And the result? You stay stuck in a trauma loop, addicted to the highs of contact, crushed by the lows of withdrawal, trying to decode someone who doesn't even know how to speak the language of their own heart. This isn't love. This is emotional captivity. You are not crazy for feeling confused. You're not overreacting. You're not needy. You're responding to a system of control that's been dressed up as indifference. And now that you've seen it, you don't have to keep playing the role of the one who waits. You are allowed to want clarity. You are allowed to walk away from mixed signals. You are allowed to say, "If you want me, show up. If you don't, let go." Because love doesn't hide in shadows. It doesn't play tug of war with your nervous system. It doesn't need to be chased just to be felt. Breadcrumbs, orbiting, and the addictive nature of almost love. It wasn't a full meal. It was just a breadcrumb, a text out of nowhere, a subtle comment on your post, a memory they brought up with no real follow-up. Something, anything that said, "I'm still here," but not in the way that mattered, not in the way that changed anything, not in the way that proved growth or showed up with intention. It was just enough to spark hope, just enough to reopen the wound, just enough to confuse your healing. This is how avoidantly attached people maintain control, by feeding you just enough emotional contact to keep you invested, without ever giving you what you really need. Consistency, accountability, presence, closeness. It's not that they're trying to destroy you. They don't even fully understand what they're doing. This is not premeditated cruelty. This is emotional survival by habit. Because to someone who fears closeness, control is oxygen. And if they can give you just enough attention to soothe themselves, while avoiding the depth that threatens them. They get to feel connected without ever risking vulnerability. This is what breadcrumbs are: tiny fragments of intimacy, designed not to nourish, but to keep you starving. A few scattered signs of interest that trigger your hope, while never fulfilling your actual need for love. And they work, not because you're weak, but because your brain and nervous system are wired to crave resolution. When someone pulls away and then returns just a little, your body lights up, dopamine surges, your brain thinks, maybe it's different this time. Maybe they're finally choosing me. Maybe we're turning a corner. It's not delusion. It's a trauma response. Your nervous system doesn't just crave love. It craves coherence. It wants the story to make sense. It wants the wound to finally close. So when the avoidant throws you a breadcrumb, it doesn't feel small. It feels like hope. And you chase it. You chase the next one. You chase a version of the relationship that doesn't exist, except in the space between what they gave and what you wish they would give. Breadcrumbing isn't about connection. It's about regulation for them. When they feel you pulling away, they drop a line. When they feel guilty, they check in. When they fear being forgotten, they reappear just enough to reattach the cord. But that cord is made of fog. It looks like connection, but it's not. It's control disguised as affection. It's manipulation wrapped in memory. It's the illusion of care with none of the substance. And it works best on the kindest people, the most patient ones, the ones who are loyal even when they're lonely, the ones who look for the best in others, even when they're bleeding from the inconsistency. It works best on the ones who want so badly to believe that love can grow from pain. The ones who have confused emotional labor with emotional worth. The ones who learn to find value in being the understanding one. The ones who were taught that if they could just love harder, they could fix what someone else buried in silence. Breadcrumbing is a cycle, and the more you follow it, the more you blame yourself. Because part of you knows they're not showing up fully, but another part of you still lights up when they drop in. And that emotional tug of war doesn't just exhaust you. It creates an addiction to almost love. Almost love is the relationship that almost worked, the one that almost made sense, the one that almost got there, the one where you almost felt safe, but never enough, never fully. Almost love is the most painful kind because it keeps you anchored to a version of the person that only exists in potential. Avoidantly attached people often create this dynamic, not because they're evil, but because they can only handle intimacy in doses. And those doses? They're scattered, inconsistent, followed by withdrawal, followed by reappearance, followed by coldness, followed by warmth. It's the pattern of someone who needs you close enough to feel safe, but far enough to not feel exposed. So they orbit. They don't commit. They don't disappear. They just circle you. Orbiting is the modern ghost. They're not in your life, but they're still watching it. Not texting you directly, but viewing every story you post. Not saying they want you, but reacting to something you shared with a subtle emoji, as if that counts for presence. And you start to question yourself. Why does this still matter? Why am I affected by a heart reaction? Why do I feel haunted by someone who says they don't want me but won't go away either? Because they won't go away. And that's the point. Avoidants use orbiting to maintain energetic control without having to engage emotionally. Orbiting says, I want to keep you emotionally attached, but I don't want to take emotional responsibility. Orbiting says, I can't be close, but I can't handle you moving on either. They're not with you, but they don't want anyone else to be either. They don't love you out loud, but they don't want to be forgotten. This is the double bind, the emotional trap, the psychological limbo that makes you feel like you're always one message away from clarity. But that message never comes. So you stay, not in the relationship, but in the possibility of it, the idea of what it could be. If they just heal, if they just open up, if they just realize what you're worth. But you can't build a relationship on ifs. You can't build a future with someone who only shows up in fragments. Let's name what's really happening. Breadcrumbing is a trauma bond in disguise. Orbiting is emotional possession without emotional participation. Almost love is the most efficient way to destroy your self-trust, while blaming yourself for not being enough. And none of this is your fault. Avoidants often don't realize the damage they cause because they think silence is neutral. They think distance is harmless. They think disappearing is less painful than honesty. But silence is a message. Distance is a decision. And disappearing, then reappearing on your screen like nothing happened, is emotional gaslighting dressed up as low contact. You deserve more than fragments, more than check-ins that go nowhere, more than passive visibility from someone who won't stand beside you in reality. You deserve clarity, not confusion, presence, not patterns, love, not longing. So what happens if you stop following the breadcrumb trail? What happens if you stop reading between the lines and start honoring the absence of real words? What happens if you don't respond to the orbit? What happens when you stop playing detective in someone else's emotionally encrypted messages? You start to reclaim your power. You start to heal the part of you that thought being chosen eventually was love. You start to recognize that your worth was never dependent on someone else's inconsistency, because love doesn't come in pieces. It doesn't hide behind breadcrumbs. It doesn't need to orbit when it could stand beside you. You are not hard to love. You're just trying to be loved by someone who confuses control with care, someone who uses distance to feel powerful instead of presence to feel safe. And no matter how long they hover, how long they breadcrumb, how long they orbit, that's not a relationship. That's a ghost wearing the mask of potential. Why avoidants fear the very closeness they crave? They want to be loved. They want to be seen. They want to be chosen, felt, understood deeply. And yet, they vanish when you get too close. They shut down when things feel good. They sabotage connection just as it begins to feel safe. This is the heartbreaking paradox of the avoidant. They long for intimacy, but fear what comes with it. They ache for connection, but brace for destruction. They dream of being loved, but panic when they feel it. You are not imagining the contradiction. This is not immaturity. This is not ego. This is a survival strategy hardwired in the nervous system. One that says, love is a threat, intimacy is danger, vulnerability is annihilation. Avoidantly attached people didn't wake up one day and decide to fear closeness. They learned it through experience, through betrayal, through conditional love, through childhoods where their emotional needs were met with rejection, shame, or neglect. Here's what's important to understand. Avoidants don't fear you. They fear what closeness activates in them. They fear the old emotional injuries, the ones that never got processed, the ones that say deep down, if I let someone in, I will lose myself. If I open my heart, it will be used against me. If I need someone, I become weak, replaceable, unlovable. So they armor up. They build distance. They become self-contained, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and have no safe way to regulate it. This is why avoidants often seem cold, not because they are, but because numbness is safer than longing. A flat affect is safer than desperation. Pulling away is safer than risking rejection for the second or 100th time. They were taught, don't rely on anyone. Don't show too much. Don't hope for consistency. Don't get attached, or you'll get hurt. So when you show up with genuine love, when you offer them safety, presence, tenderness, you don't always get closeness in return. Sometimes you get withdrawal, because love activates the very thing they've worked so hard to bury. The parts of them that once cried out for connection and were ignored. The parts that once needed too much and were made to feel ashamed. The parts that still remember the loneliness of not being seen. You become a mirror, and not just any mirror. A mirror reflecting the cost of their own survival pattern. You remind them of everything they want, but also of everything they're afraid to feel again. And this is why they may sabotage the relationship. Not because they don't care, but because caring makes them feel out of control. They may suddenly criticize you, withdraw from physical affection, minimize the connection, say things like, "I don't think I'm ready," or "I just don't feel the same anymore." But often, the real message underneath is, "I'm terrified of what you're waking up in me. I don't know how to receive what I've always secretly wanted. I'm afraid that if I let you in, you'll see the parts of me I've worked so hard to hide." Avoidants tend to confuse peace with disconnection because their early experiences of connection were often overwhelming, invasive, or unstable. So when something feels calm, they interpret it as boring. When something feels consistent, they mistake it for manipulation. When something feels safe, they begin to brace for the shoe to drop. This is the internal chaos they live with. A nervous system that doesn't recognize love as safe. A brain wired to associate closeness with loss. A heart that craves intimacy and a body that rejects it like a threat. You may find yourself asking, if they want connection, why do they destroy it? If they feel something for me, why do they act like I'm too much? If I give them space, why do they come back but never fully? Because to the avoidant, you represent a paradox they don't know how to solve. You offer what they've always needed, but accepting it would mean undoing years of emotional self-protection. Their avoidance is not just fear of you. It's fear of their own feelings. It's fear of dependence. It's fear of losing the only form of control they've ever known: distance. And so they do this dance. They come close enough to feel the warmth, then retreat before the fire can touch them. They test you. They push you away to see if you'll still chase. They withdraw emotionally but leave the door cracked just enough for you to keep hoping. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's a reflex, one that says, "I need to know I'm safe before I can be vulnerable." But the only way they feel safe is by not being vulnerable. So the loop never ends. The fear of engulfment, the fear of being smothered, consumed, or overtaken by someone else's emotional needs, is often more intense than the fear of abandonment. Because abandonment feels familiar, but emotional intimacy, that feels like drowning. Avoidants often grew up in environments where there was no room for their inner world, where having feelings made them burdens, where needing comfort made them weak, where independence was not a healthy boundary, but a requirement for survival. So now, even when love arrives gently, they brace like it's a storm. They may not say this out loud, but in their nervous system, closeness sounds like, "I will have to give up my freedom. I will be emotionally responsible for someone else's happiness. I will be consumed, controlled, hurt." So what do? They keep one foot in, one foot out. They show up, then retreat. They feel the pull, then cut the cord. They crave intimacy, but stay obsessed with their autonomy. They're not resisting you. They're resisting what love represents to their inner child. This is the part that breaks your heart, because you see their potential. You feel the bond. You sense the love under the surface. And you're right, it's there. But the presence of love isn't the same as the capacity to stay with it. You are dealing with someone who's been taught that love is a risk, that being known is dangerous, that getting attached means getting hurt. So even when they want to choose you, they will often choose safety instead. But their version of safety looks like emotional distance, detachment, avoidance. And it doesn't matter how patient, present, or loving you are. If they haven't faced their fears, your love won't feel safe. It'll feel threatening. You can't outlove someone's trauma. You can't fix a heart that's wired for war by offering peace alone. You can't convince someone to stay if their entire body is screaming, run. You can only meet them where they are and decide if you can survive there. Because the truth is, yes, they care. Yes, they feel. Yes, they may even love you. But if love is filtered through fear, it won't land in the way you need it to. If they're still ruled by the old story, the one where love equals loss, where closeness equals captivity, where vulnerability equals shame, then nothing you do can rewrite that story for them. They have to see it, name it, heal it, face the parts of themselves that say, I can only be safe if I stay distant, and start writing a new narrative, one where love doesn't mean collapse, one where connection doesn't cost them their soul. Until then, you'll always be in the same loop. Closeness, withdrawal. Connection, retreat. Intensity, numbness. Love, silence. Not because they don't want you, but because they don't know how to hold you without losing themselves. And that's the cost of loving someone who fears what they crave. You end up carrying the weight of both your needs and their fears. And that's not love. That's emotional exile. So now the question isn't just, do they love me? The question becomes, can they stand the weight of being loved? Because if not, then the only one left standing in the relationship will be you. When control replaces intimacy, how avoidance maintain power without connection. Love is not control, but to the avoidant, love without control is unbearable. Because if they can't control the space, the pace, the closeness, the distance, they feel exposed, powerless, trapped. So what do? They use emotional distance as their shield, their weapon, their lever of control. It looks like silence, withdrawal, minimal contact, being busy, a cool tone, a delay in reply, a sudden coldness right after a moment of intimacy. You feel it every time it happens. And every time, it confuses you. Because the moment things seem to deepen, they pull back. Not loudly, not with explanation, but subtly, sharply, enough for you to feel it in your body, but doubt it in your mind. This is the moment avoidants regain control, not by asking for it, not by demanding it, but by retracting access to themselves. They don't always yell. They don't argue. They don't explode. They freeze. They withdraw. They disappear inward. It's not to punish you. It's to protect themselves. But the effect is the same. You are left holding the relationship, wondering what you did wrong. Avoidants don't need to be loud to control a relationship. They control it through emotional unavailability, inconsistent affection, withholding vulnerability, strategic silence, avoiding direct communication, keeping everything on their terms. It's the control of absence, of being hard to reach, of never fully being in the relationship, so they can never fully be hurt by it. You begin to feel like the entire emotional weight of the relationship is on your shoulders. You're always the one checking in. You're the one initiating hard conversations. You're the one trying to figure out where they stand. And slowly, you begin to shrink. You tiptoe. You wait. You brace for their silence. You adjust your emotions to not overwhelm them. You regulate yourself to avoid triggering their distance. This is what it looks like when you start managing their fear, instead of feeling safe in your own. And here's the terrifying truth. Many avoidants are not consciously controlling, but they've confused control with safety for so long that they don't know how to engage in connection without needing the upper hand. They need to be the one with the least feelings, the one who cares less, the one who could leave at any moment and be fine, because this dynamic protects them from their core fear, losing themselves in another person. They were likely raised in environments where they felt overly responsible for someone else's emotions or completely dismissed. So their nervous system learned, if I don't control the closeness, I will drown in someone else's emotional chaos. Or worse, I will be unseen, unmet, forgotten. So they retreat before it gets close. They withhold to feel powerful. They limit connection to protect their autonomy. But here's the cost. In protecting themselves, they slowly destroy the relationship. Because when control replaces intimacy, you're no longer relating. You're managing. You're not building a bond. You're navigating rules you didn't agree to. You're not sharing space. You're renting it. On their terms. In their time. With no guarantee they'll stay long enough to make it home. And you start to internalize that dynamic. You think, if I don't overwhelm them, they'll come closer. If I give them space, maybe they'll see how safe I am. If I stay quiet, they won't feel pressured. But this becomes the very trap. You start silencing your needs to preserve a connection that only exists when they feel safe, but not when you do. Let's go deeper. Control for the avoidant isn't always about dominance. It's about survival. They don't want to dominate you. They want to contain themselves. Because connection brings up everything they've buried. Fear of being hurt. Fear of being seen. Fear of being needed. Fear of being depended on. So they create dynamics where they never have to give too much. Where you always give more. Where they can feel connection without ever risking collapse. This is why the relationship often feels lopsided, unbalanced. You're overfunctioning. They're under-responding. You're pouring in emotional labor. They're keeping their guard. You open up. They change the subject. You try to clarify the relationship. They get distant. You ask for consistency. They say you're being too much. And you begin to question, is it me? Am I asking for too much? Am I the problem? But you're not. You're just trying to be close to someone who's using distance as a form of protection. Let's name it more clearly. Avoidants often control through ambiguity, never fully defining the relationship, never offering real closure, always leaving things open. Emotional gatekeeping, deciding when and how emotional topics are allowed to happen, often avoiding them altogether. Inconsistency, being warm and close one week, distant and flat the next. You never know which version you'll get. Defensiveness, interpreting your vulnerability as an attack, which shuts down any real emotional intimacy. False independence, acting like they don't need anyone, when in reality, they fear becoming emotionally dependent. These behaviors don't just protect them. They create a constant power imbalance, one where you're always reaching, and they're always deciding when to respond. They become the emotional gatekeepers, the pace setters, the ones who determine how much connection is allowed and when. And the longer you stay, the more you internalize this imbalance as love. But it's not love. It's a form of emotional captivity, where one person gets to stay emotionally walled off, while the other stays wide open, hoping one day the walls will come down. Here's the thing. You can't build intimacy with someone who's obsessed with control, because intimacy requires risk. It requires emotional exposure. It requires two people stepping into the unknown together, without a safety net, and control destroys that. It replaces mutuality with dominance. It replaces trust with caution. It replaces vulnerability with performance. Avoidants want connection, but only on their terms. And that means the connection will always be limited, conditional, tense, because their goal isn't true closeness. It's predictable safety. And the moment you try to bring real emotions, real needs, real conversations, they pull back. Not because you did something wrong, but because they've reached their emotional threshold. And instead of expanding it, they retreat. So what do? You stop negotiating for closeness with someone who only offers control. You stop trying to earn space in a system built on distance. You stop begging for scraps of affection from someone who withholds love to feel powerful. You can love them. You can have compassion for them. But you do not have to shrink for them. You do not have to wait for them to change. You do not have to stay in a relationship where your emotional needs are treated like threats. Because the truth is this: if someone can only love you by staying in control of everything, they're not loving you. They're loving the feeling of being unaffected. They're loving from a place of fear, not a place of freedom. And you deserve love that isn't afraid of you. Love that doesn't silence you. Love that doesn't treat your presence like a problem to be managed. Love that doesn't rely on ambiguity to stay intact. You deserve someone who shows up, not someone who pulls away and calls it space. Not someone who sets the rules and calls it emotional safety. Not someone who confuses distance with independence and control with maturity. The greatest form of love isn't control. It's co-regulation. It's emotional presence. It's saying, I'm here, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, even when I feel afraid. Anything less than that is not connection. It's performance. It's protection. It's a game. And you weren't made to be part of a game. You were made to be met. What healing actually looks like for them and for you. So what now? You've seen the pattern. You've lived the confusion. You've felt the pull, the retreat, the breadcrumb, the orbit, the emotional silence dressed up as mystery. You've tried to decode someone who kept changing the language. You've tried to hold a relationship with someone who feared being held. But now you're here. And the question isn't, can I make them change? It's, what does healing actually look like for them? And for me, let's start with them. Avoidantly attached people don't heal by finding the right partner. They heal by becoming safe within themselves. That means confronting the story that says closeness is collapse, learning that needs are not weakness, reclaiming the emotional self they buried in childhood, practicing emotional regulation in real time, not retreat, naming and grieving the ways they had to numb themselves just to be independent. Healing, for the avoidant, looks like surrender, not to chaos, but to connection. It looks like letting someone in before it feels perfect. It looks like staying present when their instinct says run. It looks like learning to speak vulnerability, not just drop hints through silence. And that work? It's slow, painful, messy. It takes humility. It takes more than, I'm just not ready. It takes actual emotional accountability, which means this: you can't do it for them. You can love them. You can see the truth of who they are underneath the armor. But you can't be the one to convince them it's safe to heal. Because as long as you're trying to fix it, you're carrying a burden that was never yours. So what does healing look like for you? It starts with this: you stop personalizing their patterns. Their distance was never about your worth. Their silence was never proof of your inadequacy. Their ambivalence wasn't because you were too much. It was because they never learned how to hold something real. Healing is returning to the self they left you with, the one who tried to love fully, even when love wasn't returned. The one who stayed soft in the face of coldness. The one who kept showing up, hoping to be met, not knowing they were loving someone whose survival strategy was to disappear. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. And that's what healing teaches you. To stop begging people to stretch when they're committed to staying small. To stop shrinking yourself just to fit into their window of comfort. To stop defining your worth by someone who could only give you fragments. Real healing doesn't make you harder. It makes you clearer. It teaches you how to love deeply, without self-abandonment. It shows you how to hold compassion, without carrying someone else's emotional work. It reminds you that love isn't measured by what you can endure, but by what mutually expands you. So no, you don't need to hate them. You don't need to vilify them. You don't need to erase the bond or rewrite the past. You just need to see it for what it was. A connection that revealed everything you are willing to give and everything they were not yet ready to receive. If they ever decide to heal, it won't look like breadcrumbing. It won't look like orbiting. It won't look like disappearing, then dropping back in months later with a "hey, thinking of you." It will look like actual presence. It will sound like direct words, spoken without blame or excuses. It will feel consistent, rooted, safe. Until then, the most radical thing you can do is stop waiting, stop decoding, stop managing their fear at the expense of your own peace. You deserve someone who doesn't flinch at your closeness. You deserve someone who doesn't punish you with silence when you need clarity. You deserve someone who meets your depth, with depth of their own, not distance. Here's what I'll leave you with. There is someone out there whose nervous system will recognize yours as home. Not a battlefield, not a test, not a threat, but home. You don't need to perform for that love. You won't have to wonder if you're wanted. You won't be waiting for breadcrumbs when you're already at the table. So if this resonated with you, if it felt like I was speaking the words you didn't know how to name, take a breath. You are not broken. You are not dramatic. You are not too much. You are simply waking up from a pattern that was never yours to carry. And if you're ready to stop chasing love in the form of confusion and start choosing clarity, stay close. There's more to say, more to heal, more to rebuild, not from fear, but from truth. If this helped you feel seen, even just a little, you can share it, save it, or pass it along to someone else who needs to remember they're not alone in this. Because healing doesn't happen in silence. It happens when the unspoken finally gets spoken out loud, and you're allowed to speak it.